I'm starting to see my job more as a facilitator of community through music, that music is the vehicle, but it is in service to maintaining community relationships and then rebuilding. So I hope that we all kind of can keep that as a priority for ourselves.
Welcome to Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times, where we have honest conversations to help you stay rooted with integrity, rise with courage, and lead with hopeful resilience. Hosted by Deborah Owen. Welcome, friends. Welcome back to yet another episode of Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times. And I am very excited to introduce you to Julia Edwards. She is the 2026 Maine Teacher of the Year Award winner and a beloved choral music educator at Bruce Whittier Middle School and Poland Regional High School. A Mainer since childhood, she is a passionate advocate for equality in music education. Julia believes that music builds bridges across cultures, generations, and life experiences. She brings curiosity, compassion, and a spirit of joy into her classroom where students learn not just to sing, but to listen, lead, and grow. And outside of teaching, Julia is an accomplished oboe player. She performs with her folk band Bold Riley and serves as president of the Maine chapter of the American Choral Directors Association. So, Julia, as one musician to another, I am thrilled to have you on this show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great. I'd like to just dive right into some of the questions about what it means to flourish, particularly in tough times. And we are certainly experiencing some of that right now.
Mhm.
And as a music educator or as an educator in general, it often feels like an uphill battle to be able to get for the kids what we know they need. So
Mhm.
that can feel like tough times in a different kind of a way as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you've said that music and community are synonymous, and I love that analogy. So how has music created a space for belonging and flourishing in your school and classroom?
Yeah, thank you for that question. One of the things that occurred to me during COVID was, we were talking about the value of the arts and how not having, especially the performing arts, was going to impact students and their emotional well-being and their social emotional health. And a lot of the music teachers I know were talking about the value of singing in groups on one's emotional health and community health. And then the teachers I knew who were not music teachers were talking a lot about how can we teach those social emotional skills to students so that they can be independently regulating themselves. So, for example, grounding activities or things like that. And one of the things that really kind of struck me is, we there are two parts of that. There are two parts of that emotional, social well-being. And one is your independent ability to self-regulate, and the other is learning how to regulate with the people around you. And so we've incorporated a lot of mindfulness in our community. We've incorporated a lot of moments where we can be really intentional and really explicit about celebrating our sense of community together, calling attention to things like celebrating each other's mistakes, right? It seems like a silly, simple thing to do. And I'm sure I'll get to that later in the conversation too, but really leaning into the human aspect of what we do. And, we've got AI in this corner, and we have political polarization at this corner, and we've got economic troubles in this corner. And so for my students to be able to take a moment and celebrate a mistake or enjoy the opportunity to correct a mistake, I think offers a forgiveness that hopefully they'll take into their communities after that.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, that's one of the things that we need to be able to learn how to do. And some adults don't know how to do it, and that is be able to take risks, appropriate risks, and not beat ourselves up when we make a
Yeah,
mistake. And that, of course, goes into the growth mindset,
absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
recognizing that we are going to make mistakes, and that's the only way we get better at anything.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, I mean, I think one of the things that I've noticed, even just their willingness to try and tune with each other because they care about they care more about learning how to do it well or learning how to do it right in the end than being right in the moment. And I think that has been really valuable. And I think that hopefully that will continue to have a presence in their conversations and their interactions with the world around them.
Oh, and actually, what a great metaphor for life, right?
Hmm.
Learning to tune to each other,
Yeah.
and yet, as a chorus, every part is important on its own, but
Yeah.
they still need to be able to come together and make something that's beautiful. Otherwise, it's
Right.
cacophonous.
Right.
So,
We were
yeah.
just talking, we're doing a song for our winter concert that comes from the Kwanzaa tradition. And it's by Dr. Zenaida Robles, who's awesome. And it's called Umoja. It's the first principle of Kwanzaa. And the principle is unity, right? And I was listening to a really cool podcast kind of describing this in a story. And they talked about Ubuntu, right? Which is I am because we are. And so we had a nice opportunity to talk about that in class. And like, none of us are the same as when we walked into this room. And that's because of every single person in it. So,
I love that kids are learning this. I didn't learn it until a few years ago, so it's
right.
beautiful.
Yeah, I try. I'm trying.
Yeah,
My goal has been to do as much as I can to bring the world to them because a lot of them have a harder time getting out into the world. So
yeah, that's true. And I just learned about Ubuntu when I was in South Africa this last year. So,
that's awesome.
and that's a really powerful concept that kids need to begin to embody and
Yes.
experience themselves. That's
Yeah.
terrific. That's terrific.
Yeah.
And actually, kind of related to that, your teaching philosophy includes fostering cultural curiosity. So, what does that look like in practice? I mean, you're starting to talk about it a little bit. And why do you think it matters so much, especially today?
Yeah. So I think the first time I ever was handed a cultural context sheet was when I was performing with the chamber choir in at UMass with Deanna Joseph, Dr. Deanna Joseph, and she gave us when we were performing different pieces of music, she would give us just a little sheet that had information on it, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's really helpful. It gives me a better perspective on what we're singing and a little bit more meaning. And so I kind of kept that in the back of my mind, and I always tried to do my research and tell students about the pieces we were singing. And then it didn't really, the method of delivery was always just handing over a piece of paper or delivering information, right? Giving them the answers. And then I came back from maternity leave at one point, and the substitute who had been in my room had chosen a piece of music that I had in my library and had programmed before, but for some reason it just didn't sit great with me, and so I hadn't programmed it since. And something was kind of striking me funny about it again. And so I decided, I didn't want to take it away from the students because they were excited to sing it. But it wasn't sitting right. And so I did some research and I thought, well, at least if I can feel like I can justify some of these words,
Mhm.
that in a historical cultural context, that maybe I can justify having them sing it again now that I've learned more. And when I did my research, some pretty terrible stuff popped up. And
Yeah.
so I didn't want to make that unilateral decision about something that they had grown to love. And so what I did was I came to them very honestly and I said, "Hey, I wanted to share something I found about this song that you've been singing. And, it's nobody's fault to hear that this is the case, but I'm wondering what you think we should do with this information." So I put the information in front of them. I had a couple of primary recordings
Mhm.
that were fairly revealing. And the students saw the research that I had done and they made the decision. And in like about 5 seconds, it was unanimous. I don't think we can do this piece.
Yeah.
And then one student said, why aren't we doing this with all of our pieces? Like, this is really interesting. And so we started doing more of that research. And so I started reaching out to humanities teachers and other choral directors and folks at the post-secondary level and saying, hey, there's got to be some protocol that I just missed, right? That we can use to apply this to every piece that we sing so that instead of my just delivering information, which changes and evolves as I learn more and as culture evolves, Instead of just delivering that information, how do I lead them in the learning process? How do I lead them through? How do I help foster that sense of curiosity and discovery and, interest in digging deeper? And there was nothing. I really scraped the barrels, as it were, and there was nothing. There were a few frameworks for what we should do as conductors to select music that is culturally respectful and appropriate and in the right context. But there really wasn't anything for how to guide students through that process methodically. So, using a couple of the frameworks I found and then just kind of my own experiences, I developed a series of questions so that the students answer the same questions for every piece, whether that is, a pop song by the Beatles or something from South Africa or something from Ukraine or wherever.
Mhm.
Um, they're asking those questions. Where does this come from? How did it get here? Right? Like often that traveling piece is really important, and we don't use that in a lot of our research. So, how did this piece of music get here? Was there an arranger who picked it up on a trip, or, um, and then who benefits from its performance, from its publication? Where is the money going when we pay the publisher? All of that. So we dig into that, and then we kind of end with, all right, so now that we have this piece of music, what information do we have access to make sure we have a culturally respectful performance? What culture bearers do we have access to? Checking in with and conversing with to make sure that we're pronouncing things correctly, or using the right drumming pattern or whatever it is. And then what performance practices do we need to make sure we are incorporating to be respectful of this tradition? So, for example, if it is a choral piece of music from South Africa, um, then we're not going to sing it without movement that is appropriate to that piece, right? So things like that. So it's
Yeah.
been cool because then they're questions that students can actually use beyond the music classroom. I had a student who went to a museum once, and it was an Indigenous Peoples Museum, and something just said like the language was very vague. He knew that there were multiple languages represented by the word that they used, and so he reached out and he said, "Hey, very respectfully, I'm curious to know a little bit more specifics about this."
That's amazing. I love that because what you're doing is you're looking at history, you're looking at economics, you're looking at sociology, you're looking at anthropology. I mean, talk about a consilient type of course
Mm,
opportunity. I mean, it's really amazing that you're bringing in all of these disciplines and teaching the kids empathy and compassion and self-awareness.
mm.
I mean, it's really terrific. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah, I have motion sensors on my lights. There you go. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think what I love about it is that there was no part of the curriculum that was designed without the presence of students. They've had
Mhm.
a say in a lot of this process. And when I did some collaborative research with a friend from Louisiana State University, Dr. Jason Bowers. He was working on the teacher end as he prepares music teachers to make these decisions. I was working on the student end, and we thought, wouldn't it be cool to kind of collaborate and do some research together and see what the perception students have, um, what that perception is of how they've been impacted, how their worldview may have been impacted by this curriculum. One of the things that I love about it that I think is really important to mention is that because I am not offering them answers and I am directing them with questions. And some of those questions have real answers, right? Like some of them,
Mhm.
there are research questions and then there are essential questions. The
Right.
research questions often have a concrete answer. When was Emily Dickinson born? And when did she die? And why are these words of the piece that we're singing? Why, are they important to know? Why is it important to know the context of Emily Dickinson's life to better understand what we're singing? Things like that. So you've got like the years she was born, fine, all of her more census type information. But then what does it mean that hope is the thing with feathers? Or then they get to do a little more interpreting. Um, the three essential questions are why is it important? How do we inform ourselves as musicians? Why is it important that we inform ourselves? And then what do we do with the information that we learn?
Mm.
And so those essential questions should continue to evolve and change and grow as they do more of the research. Um, but I love that it creates a space by using the questions and not giving answers. It creates a space for everyone's prior experience to be welcome in the room.
Yeah.
Um, Especially when we do what we call those mirror activities, right? You've got the windows and mirrors. Um, I think especially when we're doing mirror activities and we're exploring American music, that can be tricky for some of our students, and feel very personal. And so the fact that they are being guided through a process versus told what to think or do, I think is really important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hi, thank you for letting me interrupt this episode for just a moment. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, the chances are you care deeply about leading well, especially in times that feel heavy or uncertain or demanding. One of the convictions behind this podcast is that flourishing leadership doesn't start with strategy. It starts with who you're becoming as a leader, under pressure, in grief or sorrow, in change or transformation. And that's why I've been writing a series of devotional books called The Awaiting for Advent and When Sorrow Speaks for Lent. They're grounded in neuroscience, the personality patterns of the Enneagram, and reflective practice to help you grow in awareness, self-honesty, and presence. And while they do follow the rhythms of the church year, they're really for any season when leadership feels costly. They're resources you can return to whenever you want to lead from the inside out. Not just do more or say more, but become more of who you were created to be, more grounded, more whole. So please see the show notes for links to these resources and share them with your friends. Thanks. And now back to this episode. And so then a question that comes to me as I'm listening to you explain and describe all of this is how does this help them? How does this equip them to be able to be more flourishing human beings
Mm,
now and then also in the future?
absolutely. I think it's that curiosity piece. It's 100% the curiosity piece. As we learn how much lies below the surface of our assumptions, um, it gives us it's a reminder to ask the questions, it's a reminder to engage, it's a reminder to um, consider the fact that there are multiple possible answers sometimes, to consider the fact that one source of information is not always the definitive source. I love it, I love when my students find something they think is exciting. And this kind of goes along with that anthropology piece too, right? Just because you find a piece of information that excites you does not mean it is necessarily validated.
Right.
And so we were doing a piece, we were doing How Can I Keep from Singing? And of course, the name of the composer is escaping me right now. But it was a minister who composed it.
Mhm.
And one of my students found some article that argued that probably it was these two women who wrote it and not actually the composer. And she was so excited that she thought she unearthed this like massive piece of evidence. And I said, okay, where's your corroborating source? Like, where do you have, did you cross-reference yet? Did you do these other
Yeah.
good research practices? Um, and she said, well, I could only find it here. And it was someone's blog or something. And I said, so here's the problem. While that's a really intriguing idea, but I think that's such a 21st century issue, right?
Mhm.
Where we find something that makes us feel as though we've discovered something important. And it can be really hard to then let go of that if there isn't good evidence to back it up. And so going through that process for these students while they're still in such a developmental stage, I think is really important.
Yeah. Have you talked to them about confirmation bias?
Oh yeah, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and I should say, like, we're a performance class, right? So even though this is a really crucial part of our curriculum, we don't spend much time on it. Like the actual time we spend on it in class, it varies, but they do a lot of the work in groups, and they will divvy up the questions and then share what they have found. One of the reasons I like doing it that way is because then they also feel like they have value in the conversation. They have something to offer, and they get to discuss something that they found in their research in a way that's collaborative. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's great. We mentioned when we first talked that I was a school library teacher for a really long time, and that was one of the things that was really important to me was to be able to help kids and to the other teachers that I was assisting as well in the research projects was to help kids be able to identify credible sources that they can validate. And that's not something that they were learning anywhere else. They had to learn it in school.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our humanities department does a good job of that. And our we have we lost her this summer, but we had a wonderful information technologies and library teacher who was just so good at helping them with that and learning how to
Mhm.
use databases and
That's
finding credible sources right away. So it's been fun to collaborate with the humanities department and our information folks to try and make sure that it's not only consistent but reinforced.
yeah,
Um, and that students realize that, okay, well, if this many teachers that I'm working with say this is important, then maybe I should be should be
pay
making sure that it's
attention.
part of my habits, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that actually kind of leads to the next question that I have, and one of the things that I was intrigued by as an educator was how some kids could come from homes where they really had nothing, and parents were gone, and they really had no support, and yet some of those kids thrived in school and were so successful. They did so well. And then there were other kids who would come from homes where they seemed to have everything going for them, and they just couldn't get their act together. And so I was really curious about why that was, which is what led me to want to learn a lot about neuroscience and how does the
Mm,
brain work and how what effect that might have on I don't want student success. I mean, that's a term that we use,
right,
right?
right.
And so how does that affect how they then are successful or not as they go on in the rest of their lives? And I know that you've actually gotten some very specialized training in neuroscience as well. You've explored the neuroscience of learning, I believe it is. And so I'm curious, especially through music. You want to correct that?
Yes, no, sure. I wouldn't say received training necessarily. I took a behavioral neuroscience class in college, and a lot of my personal reading is often neuroscience geared towards neuroscience or neuroscience based.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the reasons I have not yet begun a master's program is because I'm stuck between whether or not I want to do a neuroscience program or a music program. Um, my grandfather on my dad's side, Reverend Dr. Jerry Hanspicker,
Mhm.
was a professor of theology at Andover Newton Seminary, and was also very into neurolinguistic programming. It's hard for me to say. um,
NLP, yeah, sure.
yeah, NLP. And he gave me a book. I've always been interested in the brain. I've always been interested in cognition, metacognition, especially.
Mhm.
And and the neuroscience behind how we process music on like so many levels. So I'll try to organize my thoughts for you. But the first thing is my grandfather gave me a book called Liars, Lovers, and Heroes:
Mm.
What the New Brain Science Tells Us About How We Become Who We Are. And it's not so new now. I think it was written in the early 2000s, but it brought up this concept of neuroconstructivism and the idea that we had thought that our capacity was fixed at a certain point in life, our capacity for mental growth, for like mental aptitude, intellectual aptitude, and that actually we can still increase brain mass well beyond those developmental periods that we thought were so locked in. And part of that was a discussion of how the prefrontal cortex grows as a result of being worked like a muscle, right?
Mhm.
That it's not just time that grows the prefrontal cortex, it is actually the experiences and the practice and the explicit direction and really repeating these activities and that help with that development. And I think sometimes we take for granted that certain things happen because we got older, right? And so once I learned that about the prefrontal cortex piece, I've tried to be more explicit in my teaching when it comes to things like metacognition and thinking through a problem or thinking through a situation or building thought processes out loud for my students,
Mm.
so they can then repeat them. So that's
Right.
one piece.
Mhm.
And the other piece, one of my professors recommended "This Is Your Brain on Music" by Daniel Levitin, and then
Mhm.
I think it fed that interest. I don't think there's as much in that particular book that I use in my teaching, but one of the biggest things you're talking about the students who come in from different backgrounds and have different experiences. I think one of the things that we have had to do much more in the past 10 years, and I wouldn't blame COVID necessarily. I think a lot of people say, oh, ever since COVID, it was a trend that was starting before then. COVID exacerbated it. But our students are requiring much more direct instruction on executive functioning skills. There are fewer cases in their lives where they are required to think independently and make their own plan of action for anything, right? When I was a kid and we were playing out in the woods all day, um, there was a lot of independent thought. There was a lot of independent direction. I think um, in chorus, a lot of what I'm doing is getting students to notice, getting students to make an observation and kind of declare it to themselves out loud so they can make connections. I don't think that's happening naturally all the time.
Mhm.
Um, the students who come from different backgrounds, I think there's so much at play. There's the neuroscience piece. Sometimes you have resilience that happens with students who have less to start with. And then, there's so many factors, I think. Um, One of the things that neuroscience has played a role in for my teaching has been in sight reading and ear training. And there are kind of two pieces to it. There's how I work with students who struggle with pitch matching and how I consider what might be happening in their brain to be getting in the way of that, or what I need to help build up for them mentally, cognitively, to make sure they can match pitch. That's one thing that I do. But then another thing is in trying to figure out the best way to teach sight singing and to teach oral skills is learning about what it means to have an oral inventory and how our ability to place pitches or place intervals is really dependent on the types of patterns we have been hearing in the music around us leading up to that point.
So you
And
or oral in this case is AU or
AUR, yeah, oral inventory.
okay.
And so this idea that, yeah, it's really, if I grew up in a church with singing hymns, my concept of cadences is going to be very strong. It's going to be a feeling versus, my students who grow up listening to more modal pop music, and that changes how they hear things. And so that's something that has really impacted the way I approach sight singing and ear training.
I love that, and I did hear you telling Cassie at church a couple of weeks ago about how you help kids start to match pitch, and
Mm.
a lot of that has to do with their self-identity, which I thought was
Yes.
really fascinating.
Yeah.
So with those ideas in mind, what is what's the application that we can apply that we can talk about here, either that we will hope the kids will be able to figure out, and they may not be able to, but as adults, as talking about it, what's that application for some of those neuroscientific principles in becoming more um, confident and comfortable with difficult things like like
Mm.
singing or something like that? What's the application to help us flourish?
Yes, I think the biggest thing is learning where to separate a skill from an identity or a personal value from a concept. And so, for example, when I have a student who is struggling to match pitch, and this is what has come up the most. First of all, I think we need to do more work on learning about how trauma could inform our concept of a pitch and vocalization. Not always a direct correlation, but I find that it often plays a role. But when I'm working with a student on matching pitch, think something that music teachers are more cautious of is they try not to say it not to say it explicitly, and I think that has been a gift to my students is that I'm willing to say explicitly, like, you are not singing the correct pitches, and here are all the beautiful things you are doing, right? So this is a skill. This is not a reflection of who you are. I don't say all of those things out loud because then there's a little bit of the lady doth protest too much, and why are you telling me I'm still okay? But I think but I'll say, gosh, you have a really nice voice, or I'll find things that are genuinely good qualities of that student's voice or their musicianship. Or I'll say, oh my gosh, your sense of rhythm is really spot on. Um, are you aware that sometimes you have trouble matching the pitches or singing the same pitch that you hear? And often they'll say yes, and sometimes they say no. And I'll say, well, while that's something that we'll have to work on, the good news is I have tools. And if you're willing to be a hard worker, like we can figure that out. We can make that happen.
Mhm.
It might require my telling you during class, like, oh, nope, a little lower. Oh, nope, a little higher or whatever. And what I've found is when students enter that process from a place of I am building a muscle or I am honing a skill or I am almost as if they're working on a project outside of themselves, right?
Mhm.
Then it becomes this thing that they're like carving away at and getting excited about versus feeling like they weren't born with the thing they were supposed to be born with.
That goes back to the growth mindset piece again,
Hmm.
and
Absolutely.
the willingness to be able to take risks in order to
Yes.
grow.
Yes. And I think one thing that's important about connecting it to leadership, right? If we're talking about flourishing leadership, I think the ability to, I think when we see everything as wrapped up in the person,
Mm.
and we can't separate a moment or a skill or a difficult idea. When we can't separate that from the value of a person, then there can't be growth, right? Because none of us want to break somebody down to like help them change. Like that's not how it should work. And
We
so
do
I
that in the
think what is
military, apparently,
well,
but
yeah, exactly. And
yeah.
so I think what has been successful is helping the students be very objective about a skill. And that's where I think the growth mindset can happen because they are not feeling like their worth has declined until that skill has been developed. They see themselves as someone worthy of the time it takes to develop that skill, but not that their worth is dependent upon it. And so I think that's a really important piece that I try to communicate to them through my process.
I love that because you're actually teaching them how to have a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Because I think too often it's easy to think, well, either I have a fixed mindset or I have a growth mindset. And
Hmm.
and I'm stuck there, right? There's that fixed
Hmm.
mindset piece of it
Hmm.
again. But what you're doing is you're giving them the tools and the strategies and the skills to be able to grow a growth mindset,
Yeah, I'm
which I
trying.
hadn't
There's
even
that
thought
prefrontal
about.
cortex piece too, right? Is that
Right.
I can see that the result of hard work will be some level of improvement in the future. I can see that, I can trust that the person I am with has an expertise and can lead me to this point. And I think as leaders, we need to be careful of doing the same thing and making sure that if we need to address I guess you could call it a deficit or maybe it's a conflict or anything. Something that could potentially feel like there is lessened value, right? We've got a conflict because something came up, or I've asked you to do this task and your skills are not at the level they need to be to complete the task, or whatever it is. To be able to objectively separate that sense of value from the performance of the task and then be very clear in what needs to happen in order for that structure to, whatever needs to be in place for that person to be successful in the task, to be very clear about those steps and to be very clear about how we're going to support those steps.
And separate that from their worth as a human being.
Absolutely.
And that's
Absolutely.
that's key. Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
Well, I'm aware that you have a class coming up in a little while, so let me
Yeah,
just go personally for a moment.
sure.
As a musician, performer, and educator, how do your personal creative practices fuel your own personal resilience and professional
Mm.
resilience?
Oh, such a great question. I think so. I had a tough time in 2020, as many of us did, right? And I had just had my daughter. She was approaching a year old, but we were still kind of in that postpartum zone. Um, and things got really difficult, very tough. And there were physical changes that had happened, lots mental changes that had happened. And I started speaking with a therapist, and she said to me, Julia, when was the last time you made music? And I said, well, about 6 months ago now that I'm thinking about it. And she said, when was the last time in your life that you went 6 months without making music? And I never had. I never had. I mean, since I was born, it's been part of my daily life with my family. And so that was a really it's funny because we preach it to other people as leaders, right? We preach, like the music is good for you because of this and this, and you should stick with choir because, it's good for you in these ways. And then I never, even though I knew it was true, I never thought about how much it applied to me.
Hmm.
And so to see my own health, my own mental health, my own physical health kind of get to a bad place and realize how much of that was the lack of music in my life, I had to make it more of a priority moving forward. So I think when it comes to the resilience piece, I had gotten to a point where I felt pretty weak. And when I started bringing music more intentionally back into my life, aside from my job, I think that was the other piece is I realized how much my job was allowing me to keep the thing in my life that I needed. But the structure of it was there and I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to maintain it on purpose.
Hmm.
Once we didn't have school for a while, I had to be really mindful about like how am I making sure that I'm making music. So we took all of the instruments out of their cases. I got my childhood piano brought to my house from my parents' house because they weren't using it, and we got it all tuned up. And I just left it open and would play most days. I did a little bit more songwriting,
Hmm.
and what I love about that is that we talk about how wisdom can't really be bought or acquired. It has to be earned through experience. And so now when I tell my students how important it is that they continue to make music in their lives, I really feel it when I say it. I
Mm.
really, it's not just this is what the research says. It's no, I know what it looks like when you stop and please do not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's great. And I think, just for listeners and viewers, music, I mean, you and I are biased toward music, of course. I imagine other types of the arts would, any sort of creative endeavor, whether it's writing or poetry or visual arts or dance or almost anything. I know a lot of people,
absolutely.
I know some people who go to, step dance every
Right.
week or play pickleball every week
Yeah.
or whatever it might be. Some creative
Yeah.
endeavor is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, for my sister it's dance. And I remember, I know what it's like seeing her when she's been dancing and seeing her when she has not. And it is incredible to witness that. And like you said, I'm glad that you mentioned the other arts. I think we would do well to remember just how much is held together when we allow the arts to flourish, when we allow the arts to be a primary part of our lives. And one of the speeches I gave during the Teacher of the Year process at our semifinalist round, we did a whole day. It was wonderful. We did a whole day of speeches of what we would want to say to people if we had an audience. And the biggest message that I was trying to send was, music and the arts can do that. We have all these issues in education that we're trying to figure out how do we serve the needs of this kid and this student at the same time, and executive functioning and social emotional learning and all of these pieces. And every time one of those things comes up, I say, well, music can do that. We've been doing that. Music can
That's
do
your
that.
that's your tagline. Music can do
Right. And
that.
it is my tagline. It's what I keep saying. Music can do that. And so, I think we need to lean in and let it do what it is designed to do. It came from the very deepest parts of us, and it is there to serve the very deepest parts of us. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I mean, that may be the great best place to end this interview, but I'll just ask also, is there
sure.
is there anything else from what we've talked about or anything you wish you could have had a chance to add that you would like people to take away from this?
Oh, I think when you think in terms of leadership and flourishing leadership in difficult times, challenging times, it's going to be so crucial that we find ways to heal community.
Mm,
We have watched it crumble a bit.
yeah.
Um, I get nervous watching some of my students, and where they find community is often online. And while that is a beautiful thing in many ways, as far as connecting to people from around the world or whatever it may be, there are also many reasons to be concerned about that.
A lot of dangers,
And
possibly. Yeah.
yeah. And I think they experience, Jonathan Haidt has shared this idea from others that there is more freedom they experience online and more kinship. I would add to that more kinship they're feeling online than they feel in person. They don't feel like they have freedoms in the physical world.
Mhm.
We talk about just because it's not as safe as we used to perceive it to be.
Mhm.
Um, and then also, I don't know if they're feeling like they have the tools to develop that level of kinship in person, perhaps. And so I'm starting to see my job more as a facilitator of community through music, that music is the vehicle, but it is in service to maintaining community relationships and then rebuilding. So I hope that we all kind of can keep that as a priority for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no way we're going to flourish individually if we cannot flourish communally.
Absolutely. There's that Ubuntu again, right? That's
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. That's right. That's
Yeah.
great. Well, this has been fabulous, Julia. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
How can people
Thank you.
find you online if they want to learn more about what you're doing and hear about your band and things like that?
Sure. My personal website is juliaedwardsmusic.com. And it's fairly bare bones, but it has some of my research there and some of my presentations. If they want to listen to the band's music, that's Bold Riley, Boldriley. And that's just boldriley.com, maybe Bold Riley Music. I honestly can't really remember. Bold Riley Band, something.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, and then I'll be, I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I'll start working on my Teacher of the Year presence on those social platforms as well.
So that's throughout 2026. That's
2026, yes.
really exciting. Really
Yeah,
exciting.
thank you.
Terrific. Terrific. Well, thank you so much for this interview. It was great to talk with you like this, Julia. I loved it. Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank you
much.
so much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me on Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times. If you found today's conversation meaningful, please like and share this episode and subscribe for more honest, inspiring stories to help you stay rooted with integrity, rise with courage, and lead with hopeful resilience. If you have thoughts or questions, or you're interested in finding out about coaching, spiritual direction, or retreat leadership, I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out through Substack or find my website at insideoutministries.info. I'm Deborah Owen, and I'll see you next time.